It was about 2000. I was in London, and I'm a museum junkie, and I was in a museum I've only ever visited the once. It's the Horniman Museum, sort of in the south part of London, and they've got a big ethnographical section and sort of natural history section, and they just had these amazing nests hanging in a cabinet, and I looked at them and I thought they were fantastic, and then I just had this idea of making nests out of American dollars, and of course I think simultaneous to having the idea of the physical material, or the physicality of the work potentially, I also knew that, well, for me, the idea of working with the American dollar was a potent one. I find when I have an idea that often has involved working with a material in a fairly unorthodox way, and to get the material to seamlessly become, or to seemingly effortlessly knit together the concept with the physicality of the material, and the material is a large part of the concept, that there's a fair bit of trial and error in getting the material to work, and a degree of frustration, and there certainly was with the nests, because I realised, having the idea, and then because they were all made from actual nests, many of them were made from various museum collections, specimens in museums in Australia. And I remember the frustration, but somehow the pleasure, almost like a child, of having achieved something with the first nest that I set out to make, which is it's become one of the ones in the final work tender. The last ones that I made, a couple of years or so later, I never would have dreamt, with the effort with the first one, I would have got to that point. And I've always found that working with a material that it's really by the practice of, making the work that you understand the material better, and you can push it in ways that you wouldn't have known how to do initially. The effort for me was to duplicate how marvellous and how particular each individual nest was, and then, and the nest of a particular species, so that the nest would look not just like the idea of nest, but like a particular nest. And quite a lot of them, if you knew, your ornithology fairly well, you would actually know what species of bird, or at least what family of bird had made a particular kind of nest. The world around us is an amazing thing, and then the way that world is mediated in the museum cabinet. There's so much about that. It speaks about the culture, the culture that, well, the sort of really the European culture, I suppose, which from which the whole idea of the museum has sprung. And an idea that I suppose goes along with, the inception of that, and the idea of the curiosity cabinet. An innocent idea that you could actually put all these things in a museum display, and you could comprehend the world. I mean, in a sense, the museum cabinet makes the world somehow more incomprehensible rather than more comprehensible, because you've just taken little fragments of it, and conveniently left aside the context. And I find that as curious as well as the implications of what's not in the cabinet that are pointed at because of their absence, because of what has been put in the cabinet, I find more and more very interesting. So yeah, museums are treasure troves conceptually for me. Well, I had a sense, of course, that shredding American dollars was probably an illicit thing to do, and then someone found out, sort of on my behalf, that if I ever showed the work in America, shredding the American, like cutting up the American dollar, is unlawful, because it's somehow, the way you would read the Constitution, it's an unlawful act. And actually, I'd made a number of nests in Sri Lanka from ones that were collected by the gardeners on the estate where I have stayed and spent a lot of time working on various projects. And I had them all nicely packed up in boxes and baskets in my luggage, bringing them back to Australia. And I went through customs in Adelaide, and now that they x-ray all of your checked-in baggage when you arrive in Australia, my bag stopped in the x-ray machine, and I suddenly realised, oh my God, they think I've brought actual nests into the country. And then, as I said, I try and make their nests as facsimile as possible, and it was interesting, they did look like real nests in the x-ray. And then I had to unlock my bag and stand aside while they opened it, and then they looked inside sort of totally perplexed. And then one of the customs officers said, oh, are these American dollars? And I said, yeah. And then he said, I hope you don't do that with Australian money. And I said, no, I wouldn't be bothered. Because I've spent a little bit of time in countries which you could describe as, you know, developing world countries, or not sort of so-called first world countries. And I've become very aware about how loudly the greenback speaks. You know, like in those countries, people would prefer to be paid in American dollars if possible. But the power of the greenback has really faded, you know, in the last few years. And so now the greenback suddenly has perhaps become to represent a world and a system that's foundering, a system that used to be watertight and isn't any longer. And now with the financial downturn globally, and with all the other political events of the last few years that have changed the idea of America as being a sort of like a figurehead nation for the rest of the world to aspire to. Like, all of that has changed in the minds of so many of us, and I think that our regard of, you know, the American dollar in that context, along with the financial downturn, it's different now. It's funny because I've joked in the past that whenever I've chosen a material to use, it's become obsolete. Like when I worked with sardine tins a number of years ago, that form of packaging where you open the can with the key ceased to exist soon after, and I've worked editing videotape, or videos, you know, have been totally replaced as a technology. And I've also joked, well, the American dollar, you know, that won't change so quickly. But in a sense, the context of the money has changed.